Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. Now, with the August 1st tariff deadline looming, tensions are escalating between the U.S. and South Korea. Now, earlier this month, President Trump announced a 25% reciprocal tariff targeting Korean imports, a move that has reignited trade concerns across Asia. While negotiations are underway, the pressure is mounting on both sides to deliver results within just 2 weeks. And at the heart of this standoff are long-standing issues: non-tariff barriers, digital regulations, and strategic investments. To help us unpack what's at stake and where things may be headed, we're joined by Tami Overby, a seasoned expert on U.S. Korea trade relations. She's the former head of Asia at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the former president of AMCHAM Korea, and currently a partner at DGA Government Relations in Washington. A big welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. So let's start right away with the latest developments, of course. So on July 8th, President Trump released a letter stating that the U.S. would impose 25% reciprocal tariff on South Korea starting August 1st. Now, notably, the letter was addressed only to Korea and Japan. From your perspective, how do you read into this move, and what do you make of the decision to single out these two countries?
Well, it was quite interesting that Korea and Japan were the first countries to receive these letters. So far, it looks like over 20 countries have gotten letters. But I think Korea and Japan probably received the letters first because both countries are very close security and trade allies. And I think President Trump has high expectations that we will be able to do a deal with both countries. And I think he also understands that South Korea literally just got a functioning government. As you know well, Lee Jae-myung elected June 3rd, no transition, took over the reins June 4th. After months of having a caretaker government. And Japan also has a very important upper house election July 20th. So I think by giving Korea and Japan these extra three weeks of negotiating time, President Trump is hoping to secure a good deal that's a win-win for all countries.
Right. Then speaking of the new government here in South Korea, last week, Korea's chief trade negotiator, Yo Han-gu, actually visited Washington for high-stakes talks. How would you assess the current administration's handling of this trade negotiations so far?
Well, I think considering the position that Korea started out in and that they were late to the game, they're doing incredibly well. Lee Jae-myung chose Yo Han-gu as trade minister, and before he became trade minister, he spent 2.5 years in Washington at the Peterson Institute. And during that time, Mr. Yo worked very closely with members of Congress, with the administration, with think tanks, with consulting firms, with companies. So he knows Washington well. He also has a lot of friends here. And I would point out that he's only been trade minister, I think, since June 10th, but he's been to Washington several times, I think 3 trips so far. So he's well known and highly respected by his American interlocutors.
Right, so it's not really a new phase in terms of diplomacy. So it's really interesting to see how Korea's approach is being received in Washington. We'll have to see moving forward, though. But President Trump has made it clear that if no deal is reached, the tariffs will take effect on August 1st. And that said, this would be the third deadline. And some speculate there could be another extension. What's your thought on this? How real is the risk that tariffs will actually be imposed this time around?
Well, first of all, I don't think anyone can predict with any degree of certainty what President Trump will do. But I think Korea is in a relatively good place compared to many of the other countries because Korea possesses technologies that President Trump has expressed keen interest in, particularly shipbuilding and semiconductors. And in addition, Korean companies have already been doing what President Trump wants companies to do by making major investments in the United States to build their products here. But, it takes time from when you make the investment to when, for example, in Hyundai's case, for when the first car runs off the new assembly line. But during 2023 and 2024, South Korean companies were the largest foreign investors in the United States. I would also point out that Korean firms are already buying more American products. I think it was in March this year when Chairman Cho Won-tae of Korean Air announced a $32.7 billion deal to buy Boeing planes with GE engines. So I think Korea is in a good position. They're doing the things President Trump wants them to do.
Right, so there are some areas of cooperation that could help the negotiations moving forward. But looking at your past remarks, you've also expressed optimism that a U.S. Korea trade agreement is still achievable. Ms. Overby, what gives you that confidence at this stage? And from a strategic standpoint, what do you see as Korea's strongest card in negotiations right now?
Well, first of all, I think we have to remember that the U.S. only has 3 free trade agreements in Asia. We have one with Singapore, we have one with Australia, and we have one with the Republic of Korea. So my optimism comes from the fact that the U.S.-South Korea economic relationship is already significant and very important to both countries. And so while I think not all countries are going to get a deal, I'm fairly confident that South Korea and the United States will find common ground and will be able to land this deal. From my perspective, Korea's strongest card to play is that Korean companies are already doing what President Trump wants. They're already making major investments in the United States, and they're already showing a willingness to transfer technologies. Both Hanwha Oceans, Hyundai Heavy on shipbuilding have expressed keen interest in the United States. And we already see Korean companies making massive purchases of U.S. goods and services. So I think Korea is in a better position than most countries.
So that optimism is quite refreshing. And your take on Korea's strong cards gives us some clear picture of the options that we could take. Now, let's go to one of the core demands. So the U.S. is continuing to push for the removal of non-tariff barriers, especially in agriculture. And issues like beef and rice imports remain politically quite sensitive in Korea. Now, given that, what kind of compromise do you think could realistically, satisfy both sides?
Well, first, I think we have to acknowledge that because we have a comprehensive, high standard free trade agreement, our tariffs are almost already zero. So the Korean market is already wide open to U.S. products. Korea is also already a major importer of American beef. And there is a small percentage of beef that is older than 30 months that is not yet imported to Korea. But I think some American negotiators view that as leftover work from the chorus negotiations years ago. So I do think there is an expectation that we will be able to resolve that. But, on the issue of rice, every country has a sensitive agriculture product like rice. In the U.S., that product is sugar. So I think it's understandable to recognize that an issue like South Korea and rice, that's going to be a very politically difficult issue. And in reality, are Koreans ever going to buy a lot of American rice? I don't think so. I also don't think it's that big of a market for U.S. rice producers. I think the non-tariff barriers in other sectors would be more economically attractive to the U.S. negotiators. I'm not saying ag is not going to be on the table. It will be. They will want a comprehensive package. But I think they're also going to be looking at other things.
Right. So we should really take into consideration that there are some sensitive factors in terms of imports and exports. Now, let's turn to digital trade concerns as well. So Washington has also asked Seoul to ease restrictions on exporting high-resolution maps, to scale back regulations on American tech platforms. And these are closely tied to Korea's domestic regulatory sovereignty. Ms. Overby, how does the Trump administration likely view these issues? And do you think there's some room for adjustment?
Well, you ask a very important question, and I think we just saw how President Trump views tech issues with the way he handled Canada when Canada was threatening to put on their digital services tax. And President Trump threatened 50% tariffs. In the end, Canada backed down. We also just, I think today, saw the EU back down from applying their digital taxes on American tech companies. So I think President Trump has been quite clear that he watches how countries treat American technology companies very closely. And regarding the maps issue, I would note that countries like Israel and Taiwan both face similar security concerns, and yet they've been able to find solutions that were acceptable for both countries. So I'm hopeful that South Korea and the U.S. will also be able to resolve that issue. And the reality is, on the internet today, that mapping data is available. So it is quite frustrating for Americans to go to Korea and not be able to use Apple Maps or Google Maps. And yet in almost every other market they can. So I do hope that we'll find a mutually acceptable solution for that problem.
Right. Let's look forward to some compromises on that area. Now, let's also touch upon investment. You've slightly mentioned about Hyundai Motor Group. Their $21 billion investment pledge in the U.S. has been seen as quite a positive signal to the Trump administration. In your view, how much weight do such kind of large-scale investments carry in, influencing these trade talks?
Yeah, I think they're significant. And again, I would point out, particularly for the Trump administration, that the Korean industries has been doing that for the last few years. Hyundai, Kia, SK Hynix, Samsung Electronics, LG batteries, SK On. So we've seen massive investment over the last few years. And I would suggest that these investments in America are helping to supporting the American manufacturing renaissance, which frankly, Korea is really a strong manufacturing country. And bringing that technology here is very helpful. And it's something that President Trump wants. We certainly saw that in when President Yoon called President Trump in November, right after President Trump was reelected. President Trump raised the issue of shipbuilding. Korea is one of the top shipbuilders in the world, and the U.S. is very weak in shipbuilding. So yet another sector where we can collaborate together and strengthen both economies.
Right. So just to clarify, these kinds of large-scale investments towards the U.S. do you think it would really help President Trump kind of, adjust this negotiations on trade?
I do. I think that when he's thinking about who to do deals with and what kind of deal, that Korea should get credit for. President Trump, one of the main things he wants is make things in America. You won't get a tariff if you make it in America. Well, I would suggest that most of the major Korean companies are already in the process of doing that. But I would remind President Trump that it takes time from when you make that announcement to getting everything set up to be able to manufacture the plant and the facilities. And, it can take several years before the first new Hyundai car will roll off that line. So it does. I would encourage him to be a little more patient in the results of that. So I do think that those investments are very important in how he will judge what kind of a deal to give a partner.
That sounds like a good relief for many of our firms. Now, so with just around 2 weeks to go before the deadline, August 1st, Ms. Overby, what direction should the Korean government take to steer talks towards a resolution? You've stressed that Seoul must demonstrate the so-called genuine intent. But in concrete terms, what does that actually look like from Washington's point?
Well, I think the clearest signal that Seoul could send would be resolving some of these long-standing non-tariff barriers. You mentioned beef, but there are we have them on the digital side where, online Platform Act, where American companies, maybe it is not the intent of the Korean regulators, the KFTC, to target American companies, but the impact is they are being discriminated against. It doesn't, the bills, as I've seen them, don't capture the Chinese firms like AliExpress, Temu, or Xi'an, or TikTok. And yet all the American platforms are captured in that. So I think Korea could send some very clear signals by resolving some of these non-tariff barriers, send a strong message that Korea also wants to take advantage of the opportunity to make the Korean market more competitive. These things will also, I believe, be good for the Korean market.
Right, so taking proactive actions regarding non-tariff barriers would show some, definitely to show some intent to the Trump administration. Now, finally, before we conclude our discussion, beyond this immediate talks, what kind of structural concerns do you believe are really necessary to build a long-term, mutually beneficial U.S. Korea economic partnership?
Well, I think both sides are off to a very good start, but I think the continued goodwill from South Korea of showing a willingness to resolve these longstanding issues. But also, I would say I've heard from several of our other trade partners a suggestion that from the U.S. side, could be more predictable and a more predictable and consistent trade partner, and that we should honor our agreements. And I say this because we are an FTA partner, the U.S. actually, by applying these new tariffs to Korea, we're in violation of that. So I think one immediate thing the U.S. could do is we could honor our agreements. I would also, the other point I wanted to leave you with is that right now it seems to me that the U.S. is treating all of our trade partners the same. And, whether they're an FTA partner or a mutual defense treaty, security ally, a good friend to the United States, or whether they're an adversary, we're treating everyone the same. And I really think that countries like South Korea that are an FTA partner, a strong security ally, have shown already a deep sense of commitment to the U.S. market by investing heavily in the U.S., a willingness to bring the technology that the U.S. is requesting on shipbuilding, a willingness to consider investing in the Alaska pipeline. I think countries like that, like South Korea, should be treated better than other countries. And as to currently, we don't see that happening.
So let's hope that consensus would also be shared from the White House as well. Thank you for giving us a clear picture of the long-term lens between the two countries. But we'll have to leave our discussion here for tonight while we still continue to track how both sides navigate this high-stakes phase. Many thanks to Ms. Overby for your time and for your insights at this critical juncture.
감사합니다.
감사합니다. And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.